One ruck versus two ruck. So that's a bit of a debate that's sort of propped up in the last couple of years. You're a big zero ruck guy, but one ruck versus two rucks, a bit of a debate because, well, especially because of the Gawn and Grundy experiment at Melbourne that really didn't work out. There's currently debate about Luke Jackson and Sean Darcy and how that combination works. And then obviously, you talk about Melbourne, who had then traded out Grundy to Sydney, and Gawn working solo again, and probably at this stage, without giving away too much, you'll be in the mid-year All-Australian team that we'll have on ESPN.com.au. So I guess it kind of got us thinking about how ruck work has kind of changed in the last few years. And we're taking a real sort of broad lens on this firstly, and then we can kind of drill down a bit more. But is one ruck better than having two rucks? Is two rucks better than having one? What are the stats kind of show us? I know it's sort of fingernail deep, but what do the stats show us about having one big guy versus two rolling through the ruck?
It's completely changed this year. So probably other years there was not much in it. Interesting 2020, there is some interesting numbers in 2020, the shortened game. So if you go back to 2019, if you played with one ruckman, so again, we look at when a team selected, the 22 or 23 players selected, you have a season position at that time if you entered that game as a ruckman. So
because you're obviously going to have someone else.
Yeah, so we talk about if it was a round one game, they might start with 0 rucks. But by the end of that game, they're going to have one ruckman based on who played the ruck for them in that game. So this is taking away that upcoming matches bias and just saying you came into the game and you either had one ruck or two rucks listed in your team. We've seen... I've got it here. I think there's only been 2 or 3 games in the last few years where we've seen 3 ruckmen play in the same game. A few years ago for St Kilda, it was Ryan Abbott, Rowan Marshall, and...
Don't say Tom Campbell.
Paddy Ryder. Paddy Ryder was still at the club. So I don't think Ryan Abbott did any ruck contests, but because he played his first 2 games as a ruck, he started that game as a ruckman listed position, but would have played forward. So very rarely do we have to go to 3 ruckmen. But 2019, if you played with one ruck, you win 48% of the time. If you played with 2 rucks, you'd win 56% of the time. So slightly better with the 2 ruck system. 2020, it's probably the biggest difference we've seen. 47% of the time you win if you played 1 ruck. 60% of the time you'd win if you played with 2 rucks. That's the high. So I've gone back to 2019, looking at the last 5 seasons. That's the highest sort of win rate when you played with 2 rucks. What's interesting for me is the shortened games, and we talk about ruckmen don't get shorter. So they obviously they can run less, and then the speed will get to them, but in those shorter games in 2020, it seemed like to have 2 taller blokes that could keep going into the stoppages, and then the rucks was more valuable than it has been any other year.
That's interesting. So if the debate about sort of shortening quarters and shortening games, maybe
if I'm a ruckman, I'm putting my hand up to shorten the quarters. It seems here. 2021, 48% win rate 1 ruck, 51% with 2. 2022, 48% win rate to 53%. Last year, 48% with 1 ruck, 52%. So very, very bland, very boring numbers. This year, 52% win rate with the teams that have chosen 1 ruckman, 38% win rate for the teams that have chosen 2 rucks. So it's dropped all the way from 53, 52 in the last 2 years.
Now this is a question without notice, but that only adds up to 90%. Is that because of the draws that we've had this year?
Yeah, it would be. Yep. So this is just looking at the winning team and how many ruckmen.
Would that be? So. But so if you've got a game, if you've got a game and both teams select 1 ruck or 2 rucks.
This isn't a ruck difference. So this is just looking at if there was 2 teams. Yeah, exactly. That's why these numbers are a bit funny. If there's 2 teams that are playing against each other, 1 ruck, it's going to be 1 and 1. It's going to be 50% win rate. So it's such a low drop in the numbers, but it is. It's probably 2 or 3. It's Freo, Carlton when they've played the 2 rucks actually have sort of a slightly better win-loss rate than when they've played with just a single ruck. And Freo have probably been the two main ones that have clearly sort of dropped when they've played 2 ruckmen. But
really?
It's very, very early days. But yeah, the 38%, as I said, it's the lowest percentage we've seen in the last few years. And it sort of does say to me that I think the game is changing a fair bit. The stoppages were going through the roof about 7 or 8 years ago. We brought that back, and transition has become a big part of this year. So
100%.
We spoke about it at the start of the pod. I think 10, 15 years ago, 35% or 40% of the time you started in your back 50, you went to forward 50. That's down to about 23% now. So it's not as big as it was 15 years ago, but it was 18% a few years ago. So the transition's creeping back into it. Stoppages are down. And I think this number here, 2 rucks just doesn't get you a win this year.
So Freo's in a bit of an interesting predicament because they've signed Sean Darcy long term. They've brought Luke Jackson over on big money for long term as well. And they've now got these 2 guys. And, without being disrespectful to either of them, neither of them are a key forward first. It's not like you're playing one of these guys.
Luke Jackson's best games have been when he's had 18 contested possessions with 5 kicks and 19 handballs. He is a ground level mop up.
And Sean Darcy's a truck. In the best way possible. He is what he is, and he has his value and his worth. But these guys aren't going to be resting forward, or what are you going to do? Play him on the bench the entire game?
Well, that's exactly it, and that's why this number isn't surprising to me. And I know I've been banging on about this for 4 or 5 years now. But it's not surprising because of the way the game has changed. And that was always my thing with the whole ruck debate, was that the game's changing. The game isn't what it was in the 80s and 90s, and the game continues to evolve, and it becomes more about what do recruiters value now? What are they constantly looking at? Athletes, runners. It's all about running. It's for most ruckmen, generally the biggest weakness is speed, mobility, and their ability to get around the ground. So it's not surprising to me that you have 2 of these guys playing. You're not going to win as many as if you have 1. And instead of having another ruck playing, instead of having Sean Darcy, with all due respect, or Luke Jackson, you have another midfielder, or you have someone else that can provide a bit of pace and that can actually use the ball better. It's not surprising to me that you will win more games. Now, it's not to say that there will never be. It's not to say Max Gawn should be dropped and they should bring in their 25th best player to play instead, but the value of having 2, it just does not seem like the way in which any club should go, and it doesn't seem like the way in which the sport's going.
A win rate dropping off 14% in one season from that 2, so 52% winning with 2 rucks last season compared to 38% far this season.
And I could see it going. I can see it continuing, that trend to continue dropping.
Are there players that do fare better? Like it's quite noticeable from the stats, though. You can talk rating points in this case. Are there players that it's very clearly evident that play better as a solo ruck?
Yeah, so Luke Jackson's 3rd on that list, and he's the one that stands out to me. So he's +6 rating points when he's played as a solo ruck. And we know Luke Jackson's whole career has been second fiddle to Max Gawn, and then probably gone over to Freo and had to sort of share the ruck load. He probably hasn't played second fiddle as much. But yeah, 6 more. It equals second biggest differential. 6 more rating points when he plays as a solo ruck than when he has to share the role. Equals second with Mason Cox, who also sort of makes sense to me. He's a pretty good forward. He's probably different to Luke Jackson, Sean Darcy, that he does have that forward craft and goes forward. But I think a lot of the games where Cox has really got involved for 4 quarters is when he's been given that number 1 ruck role. When he's sort of got to go forward for 50%, he might kick 2 goals and go missing, and then he goes to the ruck and has a few hit-outs here and there. They played as a solo ruck, 12.3 rating points per game is a pretty good output. Finn Layson's another one. So Finn Layson's got the biggest differential. He's had about, I think it was 5 or 6 games where he's been the solo ruck.
Right?
So it's enough in that time. So 2019, 2020, I think a lot of them were back then. 16.9 rating points when he was a solo ruck. 8.3 when he's played as a 2 ruck, which is probably usually he ends up going forward. So yeah, he's actually been good probably 3 or 4 years ago playing that ruck role. And exactly to Jake's point, he's that mobile ruckman. He's not going to win you a lot of hit-outs, but he's going to give you that extra value of marks around the ground.
So those rating points aren't specifically ruck-related ratings?
Yeah, it's just when you can get Finn Layson. No, yeah, exactly. It's as a ruckman, he's getting those rating points, but I would assume, I haven't broken them down, I assume they're not from
goals,
hit-outs.
tackle, kicks.
They wouldn't be a high percentage from hit-outs as other ruckmen. It's not the pure ruck work that he's smashing it in. It's more about just getting him up and around the ground. Kieran Briggs, another interesting one for the Giants. He's got the 4th biggest differential, almost 14 rating points per game when he's solo ruck, and 7.8 when he's had to play with a second ruckman.
We kind of saw the proof with this last year with Gawn and Grundy. That was
cannibalising each other.
Well, yeah, and it's like, for most people, they were the 2 best, or close to being the 2 best rucks in the game for a long period of time. You bring them together, not only do you then have this issue of, well, can we play them both in the same team, which ultimately they couldn't, but by doing that, it takes away from Gawn. So it penalises you in 2 different ways.
So Gawn on this list was 14th differential, so I've sort of got the top 5 or 6 names here. So he didn't have a huge differential when he had to play as a second ruckman, but the majority of games, as I said, Luke Jackson played a lot of games with him. They had Brodie Grundy, that's a blast from the past. Brodie Grundy was there last year, and then this year he's basically been a solo ruck all year. Even when he's played in that 2 ruck system, he's averaged 13.5 rating points per game. Some of the names I mentioned there, Cox as a single ruckman, 12.3 rating points per game. Briggs as a single ruckman, 13.7. Yeah. Meek as a single ruckman's pretty good, 13.1. Gawn with 2 rucks in it, he drops a little bit, but he's still 13.5. So I think Gawn Yes, he
good enough
dropped
to
off a little
overcome
bit.
the
Exactly,
yeah.
but Gord is still going to be a gun whether you play a second ruckman or not. I think it was really Brodie Grundy's numbers that took the hardest hit trying to sort of fit in and playing second fiddle. So if you want to look at guys that do go the other way, Darcy Cameron's an interesting one for me.
So Darcy Cameron really, but I feel like his value can be forward.
Yeah, but he's only had the 3 or 4 games where he's been the solo ruck. So he's played a lot of games with Mason Cox, I think would be the most one. That's been in at Brodie Grundy 2 years ago. I don't think Billy Frampton's ever been rated. I think he's always been a key defender at Collingwood. But it was a smaller amount of games than I thought. And when he's played as a single ruck, he's got 6.9 rating points per game. When he's played with another ruckman, it's 11.2 rating points per game. So he does like to get a chop out from the Mason Cox and Brodie
A few of the other names on this list. So I'm assuming that's Hayden McLean, Peter Wright, Marby or Chol. Like these are guys who are very much second rucks who are forwards.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense.
But I think it's for one of those ones, and I don't think it gets thrown up anymore. But Essendon, if Essendon get an injury to, I know Draper's already out injured, and Goldstein gets another injury, I wouldn't be throwing up, hey, Peter Wright's at least an option for the ruck. He's 6.4 rating points when he's played as a solo ruck. That's pretty poor. So in terms of people thinking, because he plays that second ruck on the day they have a ruckman, doesn't mean he can instantly be a full-time.
Interesting stuff. I think that's enough time spent on ruckman. Jake, your thoughts?
Well, I think you know my thoughts. And as I said, I think it will continue to trend downward as the game. The game's not changing. The game isn't unless we shorten the games, which is a possibility.
And then you'll eat your words.
That's the only way in which you can, as Christian said, 2022 was an interesting case. But if that isn't to happen, I can only see this trend continuing.